Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities. It's an opportunity for people to share how they've gained their sense of identity and how they've gained their sense of belonging through their lives' experiences. And I say this every week, but we have a really special guest. Um, this young lady is Sharon Datt, and Sharon is the head of logistics and compliance at EMEA. She has an MBA from Imperial, and she's a logistics management specialist. So, Sharon, I really want to say a big thank you for being our guest this week.
Yeah, happy to be
Um,
here.
and yeah, I'm going to kick off by asking my first question. Can you tell me what it was or what it is that gave you your sense of identity and sense of belonging when you were growing up?
Yeah. And I've known sort of imperialism for a little bit of time and kind of given you guys my history, but I think, a lot of my background still falls as, when I think about it, an American background. Obviously, I'm living in London now, but just being an immigrant in America, and how, that topic seems to rise again and again through politics and whatnot. Um, but I think that that was something now when I look back at how would I have identified or what has helped me become who I am today was really seeing the experiences of my parents and what it meant for them to be immigrants in the US. So we moved to the US when I was 8 years old, and that was from Fiji. So when you say my identity, I have this, really long-winded sentence where I am an Australian-born Fijian Indian American living in the UK.
Right. So let's just break that down again. Australian-born Fijian Indian living in, well,
American living in the UK.
American. Okay, you're gonna have to unpack that for us if you don't
So
mind.
it's quite the identity. And then it makes you question a lot about like what is identity, right? Which is
Yeah.
what we all do anyway. So I've managed to dwindle myself down to that. But yeah, so my family moved from Fiji to America. And to be fair, it wasn't until I was 13 or so that I learned that one of the reasons I was born in Australia specifically was because of, again, the political dynamics, the economical situation in Fiji, that led to my parents, wanting to raise their children in a place that had possibly better opportunities.
Yeah.
Which is quite an interesting concept. And you would almost say, the normal immigrant ambition, I'd
Yeah.
suppose, or one of them at least. So that's how I was born in Australia, and it's like the coolest thing, but it's not because it's not like I'm a citizen or anything there. And then going back to just how would I have said what gave me my sense of identity? It was just seeing my parents work really hard. Um, in Fiji, there was a sense of, quote unquote, being well off. My family had a big furniture business. It, as an 8-year old, it looked relatively successful. Who knows?
Yeah.
Um, and it seemed like we had this great life. And then all of a sudden you're going to America, and you're just a kid. But when you get to the US, we don't have like the nannies we had and things like that growing up in Fiji. And now I'm seeing my parents, work really long hours, sacrificing quite a bit. A lot of growing up quite quickly because you realize actually, there's a lot more going on here, and there's a life to be made, I guess. And even at a young age, I think I saw that quite quickly, the difference of the
Yeah.
lifestyle. Um, so that I think led the course to who I've become today.
Mhm.
I probably work too much for my own good, but for today's, what is work between the new generations and whatnot. But I think it comes a little bit, the work ethic I have is, just from seeing my mom. I'm quite close to her, and how hard she works even till today. Um, and that kind of gave me a lot of, this is who I want to be when I grow up, seeing what struggles my parents went through and who they wanted me to become because of the sacrifices they made, has helped in, continuing to strive for more now, and say, I mean, of course, it's nice, especially living in London. I think it's a good work-life balance versus, I mean, to be fair, when we go back to the US, we're like, oh yeah, actually it is a lot more fast-paced here. And I wonder what it would have been like if we had stayed living here. But on the other hand, relatively speaking, I think how much I work or what I'm trying to gain career wise definitely comes from the ambitions I think my parents had for us when we were young.
So let me just try and unpack some of what you've just said, because it sounds really fascinating. So when you made those transitions, because there was a number of transitions, so you transitioned. Sorry, the dustbin men have just decided to come, and anyhow, we won't go there. Um, just in terms of those transitioning, when you transitioned from Fiji to the US, in terms, because you were at quite a pivotal age, about eight, nine. So it's kind of like so many things going on at that stage. How did that impact on your sense of who you were? Did you go in feeling, because now you've got this, we're seeing you now and you class yourself as American, but then what did you see yourself as at that stage?
Yeah. And even then, you're so young and you haven't really studied that much into any of this kind of stuff, to realize anything. I knew, so Fijian Indians were quite funny, where if we meet someone, obviously I look Indian, right? But we'll be the first to be like, oh no, but I'm Fijian Indian. It's just like a thing. And also if someone wants to learn Hindi, which we speak a dialect of, and if they're say at our house and they'll be like, how do I say, can I have a glass of water? We'll say, well, Indians say it this way, but Fijian Indians say it this way. So we're very like Fijian Indian. It's really funny. And I've realized this not just with myself, but just the community in general in the US or anywhere else. Um, so I knew, I classed myself as Fijian Indian. There was no thought of like being American. Um, but I thought it was, I'll never forget when I first got to the US as that young kid, and meeting other kids, and they, the question I got was like, how do you know English? And I just was like, I don't know, I just know English. But of course, Fiji was British ruled, so the curriculum was British English, in school and things. So I must have, surely, learned at kindergarten and on. Like, so for a long time it was just Fijian Indian, and then I think as I got older and started traveling the rest of the world, was there a lot more like, okay, well, this is how things are in the US. And more did I realize how American I was. I mean, so much time has gone by, and America's
Mhm,
home, right? I mean,
mhm,
even now,
mhm.
when people say, would you ever, move back home? They're talking about the US, like home is, wherever in the US. So, um, yeah, at some point you're more American. And then you live in a place like London where there's just a lot of banter, and the whole thing comes up a lot of just being American. So
Yeah. So culturally then, so as you said, I really like that point about this is how Indians would say it, but this is how Fijian Indians say it. I really like that kind of recognizing that your trajectory had changed just because of the location that you now found yourself in, i.e., in Fiji. And then even in America, it's again, that community of we are slightly different, even though we are ancestrally the same,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Indians are quite interesting as a whole, the billions of us, where the culture
Mhm.
has stayed through generations and generations, because even my grandparents hadn't been to India. So my first time going to India was studying abroad. And
Mhm.
it was for 6 months, and it was like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, this is different. But we were so Indian, and are so Indian, like Indian weddings, food, culture, Bollywood. There's all of that transpires within the culture. But we do tend to very much focus. Okay, well, we have that Fijian side. There's a lot of like islander sort of vibes and different types of foods that's integrated into our Indian food that would be more island sort of influenced, right? I think, for me, and, you learn about all this later in college and stuff, but it is interesting how different diasporas have kind of changed their ways in different environments that they've been in.
Yeah.
And Fijian Indians happen to be one set of those. Um, but and then you live in a place like London where there's Indians here from Kenya or wherever, right? And you're just again seeing how different components of colonialism had moved all of us everywhere, and that's how these diasporas came to place, etc. But you do realize that there's that sense of uniqueness of having left India,
Yeah.
and whatever our families faced or didn't face or experience, that kind of led to who we ended up being later. You
Yeah.
know?
So I really like that picture that you've just kind of like painted, in terms of the fact that that ancestral heritage, those things which haven't left you, irrespective of the places where you end up finding yourself. So whether it was in Fiji, whether it was in Kenya, in Africa, wherever it was, that was part of an identity, an ancestral identity, which has been maintained throughout. So
Yeah.
there was something that you said which was about, you didn't actually go to India until you were studying, and you
Yeah.
chose to go and spend 6 months in there as study abroad. What was it that was helping to determine that choice of saying, you know what, I want to go and because you could have studied anywhere abroad. Why
Yeah.
India? Other than the obvious, but you made a conscious choice.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that it's a funny thing with not necessarily just my generation, but with just humans, right? We're constantly it's a silly concept of finding ourselves, and so at that age, that's what I thought I was doing is it just be like a nice way to understand what you're saying, the heritage of my family, like where do we come from? And I found it quite interesting in Santa Barbara, is where I went to school, in just while in those classes, really learning about everything from colonialism in India, partition, etc. That's a little bit more recent to what was happening during British rule, and Indians taking the way that they were taken, right? Whether forcefully or by choice. There's not a lot of records of exactly who my family was when we left India. And some uncles and stuff have done some research, but sometimes you talk to people and they can go back 7 generations of their
Yeah,
family all the way through,
yeah, yeah.
and it's that a little bit of that is gone. And for me to specifically say India as study abroad was, people would assume when they see me like, oh, India, you can go visit family, etc. But it's like, oh, we have no family there. We have nothing there. And so I'd almost taken an educational attempt at it, of trying to understand what truly would it have been like, or my assumptions while I was there. And it does bring up a lot of the questions of the what ifs and what nots, right? You see what India was like, and this is back in 2007, so India itself has developed so much, but And just seeing the poverty, etc., and then not really knowing where would your family have fallen in line with the status of what India does and its own systems, right?
Yeah,
Which we can talk about for hours, India and their systems.
yeah.
But that was one of the reasons, was to kind of get my own perspective. And to be fair, it was great, because that motivated my mom and dad to come visit me to India, and it was their first visit, and I think my at least on my dad's side, my grandparents did visit India once, I hope. But there's just there's I think more and more Fijian Indians are exploring, just like going back to India. And when you go there, it's you have this familiarity of so many things, right? I mean, religion is so big with Indians, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of right there in the forefront, and then all of the components of that. But it was, I mean, I want to go back, but sadly, I just haven't gotten back because now I live in Europe and there's so much more to travel here. But um, but I'm really glad I had done that. And you know what? I think, whilst you haven't asked this, that was my realization truly, and this has nothing to do with almost being Fijian Indian or not, of like true wealth and poverty, like dichotomy in essence. It was really the first time, and now, I'm 20 years old, so now really trying to understand who I am. And maybe this is a big part of what made my identity is seeing that level of poverty for the first time
Mm,
was a big reality check of, okay, well, yeah, I am American. There's just that you always can compare the different levels of poverty in different countries. And it was fascinating, but also sad, to see that and say, wow, this is how different people can live their lives. And I sort of came back from India realizing, you don't need you don't need to be a billionaire, like, despite the many
mhm.
that exist today.
Yeah.
But and just kind of a different view on consumerism and things like that, just from seeing that level of that depth of poverty was a big growing up moment. I
Mm.
wouldn't take back that moment. Those 6 months in India probably really changed my trajectory on thought of what was going to be valuable in my life for me.
So do you think it was, so do you think it was related to the clear visibility of the inequitable or inequalities that was on display, where you had wealth on one road and dire poverty on another? Was that what then gave you kind of like change your perspective, if you
Yeah.
understand what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think before that, and rightfully or wrongly, I personally probably would have just gone about living my life, working for more things, versus that realization led me to want to learn more, first off,
Mhm.
because I think, and that's another thing of the privileges of being American, right? Like, school is almost there for you, and you're just some kid going to school not thinking twice about it, getting your grades and just trying to get done. Whereas that was a lot more of, okay, how has the world become this way, and your interest in learning increases when I saw something like that. But also, it did make me realize that what was a lot more valuable to me.
Mm,
The experience itself made me realize, actually, I need to have more of these experiences,
mm,
versus whenever I do go back to the US. And, because they had prepped us so much for study abroad, they told us, um, be ready to see the poverty, be ready to see a different type of world.
mhm,
And again, I mean, that was 2007, and I
mhm,
haven't gone back, so I have no idea what it's like now.
mhm,
But the culture shock more so happened when I came back to the US and realized the life I was leading in the US. That was a big culture shock of like, oh, okay, well, all these things that were important to me no longer seem even relevant.
mhm.
And they're just silly things, right? They're just, people wanting more stuff. And I
Yeah.
I came back realizing how much I didn't need the stuff. And who I have become today, and one of the reasons we live in London specifically, or the UK, is there's plenty of time to do work, yes, as our careers progress, but that need for travel and the importance of travel is more so not to just check off countries off your list, but to gain those experiences and those perspectives, really allow you to kind of decide how you want to then pursue your life, right? What
Hmm.
kind of person you want to become.
Hmm. So
So
it so it sounds to me like that trip that you made to India was pivotal in shaping your worldview of the importance of understanding cultural identities and understanding the perspectives that individuals have based off what they have, if you understand what I
yeah,
mean, you know. Um, and you mentioned about consumerism, and how much we consume and how much do we actually need compared to how much we actually consume and think that we have
yeah,
to have, you
yeah,
know. Um, so in terms of, so then how did that, you said that it helped to shape kind of like the activities, the events that has now led you to be where you are. What was it then that made you kind of like think about moving from the US as home to coming over to the UK, and the kind of role which you occupy or do?
yeah. I think there's like a beam of sun just like on my face, just
No,
like, which is, it's
you look
nice to have some.
angelic. Don't worry.
It's nice to just have some sun in London on a January day. Um, but um, that was all, I mean, it's a mix of hard work and just, I always say effort and a little bit of pure luck. I happened to end up at a company, the previous company I was with, that led, it was a big international company. I literally started as a contract worker,
Mhm.
and very corporate, and I think that's why I do the volunteer and the work that I do on the side that I'm involved in, just because um, it felt very corporate all the time. But because of, I guess, my work and my progression there, the opportunity to come to Europe just literally, I mean, I was living in Denver for that company, and I had a boss come to me and say, "Do you want to go to Brussels, on a Tuesday?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." I'm this, 27-year-old, like ready to see more of the world. And I'm like, "When?" And he's like, "On Saturday." And I'm like, "Yeah, let me cancel all my plans." Of course I want to go to Brussels. And so it just, then one opportunity leads to another, and you just
Mhm.
kind of keep proving yourself. So I ended up in Germany first and lived there for 3 years.
Mhm.
And then, I wasn't ready to go back to the US, and kind of knocked on the doors for London. And, it's the best decision ever, because the UK does feel like a nice in between of mainland Europe and the US. And it's just, such a great culture here. Like, it's just a fun place to be. London is a great place to be. So that all kind of just fell, well, I guess I could say all day it fell into my lap, but it did take effort. It takes
Yeah.
that initiating, it takes the willingness,
Mhm.
um, and it takes the effort is more than just wanting to get there, but ensuring that you are that person that is learning about their cultures and adapting to, enjoying it.
Yeah.
I know plenty of friends that came to, either it was mainland or here, and then went right back, right? It just didn't feel right. Whereas it is about a part of, in embracing the culture, and wanting to find what you like best of it.
Mhm.
Um, go
Just
ahead.
just to follow up on that point which you just made, do you think it's partly due to the fact that from a young age you had been exposed to multiple cultures? Yeah.
Yeah,
I
100%.
don't, yeah, so when you go to another one, you know that in order to not necessarily fit in but to understand, you have to do some learning, etc.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think about that all the time. In
Mhm.
fact, I mean, to the point where, um, sometimes if nothing changes in too long, I can feel myself, all of a sudden feeling complacent, even
Mhm.
though, and you can trigger change in your life. But I do think because at a young age, there's that drastic move to the US, but even within that, my parents try to decide where to live, what part of California, et cetera, et cetera. You're changing schools often. And I'd never been really that student of like, oh no, I really don't want to change schools. We need to stay in this area. I think just the last year of high school, it was like too late, and we
Mhm.
made sure that I stayed and um, finished that one high school. But otherwise, uh, when you I guess I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, because I grew up with so much change, I almost crave it even today,
Mm.
because and it's great as an adult because then you can, take different types of classes and you can go to different parts of the world or do whatever. And that's where, our privilege comes in, right? We
Mhm.
work to have these lifestyles. Um, but yeah, that played a huge role, and I still think about that actually quite often. Is the reason whenever I start thinking, oh man, I could really do with some change, I go right back to that. It's like I grew up as a person that had so much change constantly in life.
So, but if there's there's a couple of questions stemming from that, which is kind of like ruminating in my head, which is about wanting that constant change, or but isn't there some part of you that also wants something which you would say is a kind of like a stability?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's change and there's stability, if you get what I mean.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
balancing
Especially
up
as you
the
get a bit older.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, we
yeah.
just bought our first flat in London, so we're definitely sticking around.
Right. Fair enough.
That's as stable as I can get. And it's really messing with our monthly travel plans. So, that's yeah, no, I mean, it's just such a and of course, as we get older, I've been really fortunate. I mean, the stability, I was with the same company for 16 years. That
Wow.
was, so this new company, I've only been with them almost 3 months, but a great company that I'm with, and
Mhm.
if I wasn't those 16 years, I wouldn't have gotten this opportunity. So,
Fair enough.
but
Mhm.
even in that 16 years, I was quite fortunate with them where if an opportunity arose, either I was thought of or I initiated like what if, and ended up doing, 4 different offices with them, lots of different roles. Um, so yeah, I mean, it all comes with that's probably where my immigrant mom would want to make sure that I'm not just all over the place.
But it's that you've got that stability. Well, clearly now you've got that level of stability and that, but without getting complacent,
Yeah.
is what I'm hearing. Is
Yeah.
that you still want to explore, you still want to learn about the environment that you're in and the environments which you could potentially go into in the future, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
which I
think that's what keeps life fun too, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, it's that variety and the
Yeah.
level of the variety, which I think is very important. So let me ask a quick question, because you said that you were with the one company for 16 years. What and I gave you the title of head of logistics and compliance. Can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what that
What
actually
that
is?
even means.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, the company I work for now is so it's another corporation, a really great one to be fair. They really care about their people and sustainability and things, but
Mhm,
it's of like particular shoes that we all know.
mhm,
And my role and my team's role is really to get the goods to where they need to be
mhm,
from abroad. So when you
mhm,
when people say logistics or supply chain, etc., and I think during
mhm,
COVID that really woke everybody up
mhm,
because there's always supply chain issues, and that was where in my previous company we were those people. We were the ones helping companies like the one I work for now get their goods from abroad. And so, there's this whole infrastructure behind the scenes of how people can go to a shop and buy
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
And a lot of that, and there's a lot of questioning what globalization is today, and certain interpretations, which who knows.
Hmm.
But in it really grew. I mean, global trade has been, it's the first really sense of business, isn't it? Trading was
Mm.
happening well before any of the things that exist today. So, this is just a component of global trade hundreds and hundreds of years later.
Hmm.
And, you know, at my previous company, I learned a lot about how things worked. And when you talk compliance, that also has to do with global trade, and how complex it is today. There's also the customs side,
Hmm.
and there's the packaging and waste and those types of compliance, because again, all these goods are being made, and they come in boxes, and what happens to them and so on. So there's lots of different components to my role where I just need to make sure that things are happening smoothly, really. I mean, I think most of our jobs are just trying to make sure things are happening smoothly.
Absolutely. It's,
um
it's, yeah, carry on. Sorry.
No, but it's just, a really interesting industry. It's one of those where you'll never have like the same day
Hmm.
each day.
Hmm.
And the roles really just are big on communication to the relevant parties. But it could be really fun, and you learn a lot. I don't know. I just fell into it and ended up being with them for 16 years.
Was I was gonna ask how you came about. Um, what was it about the role, the job, the role, which kind of like interested you in the first place? Um, is it something that you had thought you might do when you were younger,
No.
or
No, no idea. I knew, like as a kid, like when people are like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I knew I wanted to do something in business. My family had a furniture
yeah,
business. I knew it was going to
yeah,
be something business related.
yeah,
Um, and I remember thinking that, still quite young when I was in the San Francisco, the first office. And it's like, oh, I'm wearing like a very business suit today. I guess I must be a businesswoman now. And now it's like, can I just stay in my sweats and work from home? Uh, but it was quite literally, you're done with undergrad, you need a job, you can't be living in the house for free. It was very much a temporal. I walked in, somehow passed the interview, and I didn't even love it in the beginning. I just was like, I don't know what I'm doing and what this even means. But it was at some point I just started, when I realized what I was doing. Actually, just like when you're asking, like, what does that even mean?
mm,
In the beginning, for the first 6 months, I didn't even know what I was doing. It was just a lot of pressing buttons. It was very like entry, young kid job. But when I realized, oh, okay, we're bringing these goods into the US and we're actually customs clearing them. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah.
and I ended up getting, I'm a licensed broker in the US. So like just a lot of knowledge on that. But what made me then stay was the opportunity. As soon as I saw that this company had a lot of offices, a lot of global offices, things like that, instantly it was kind of like, okay, well, if I can prove myself here, maybe they'll consider moving me. And I was always thinking short term. I never even thought I was going to visit Europe, let alone live here for 10 years. Um, and yeah, when I had so I had my eyes on the US. I just knew I
Yeah.
wanted to move to a different office in the US. And
Mhm,
then Denver came about, and
mhm,
I took it in a heartbeat.
mhm,
And then that's where the whole Europe sort of conversations and all that started. But that's what made me stay. Was it is of course possible to move and get visas and stuff, and everybody does it, but
mhm,
it's not necessarily the easiest.
mhm,
um, so I was fortunate that these guys kind of had that faith in me, I guess.
mhm, mhm. That's really really interesting. Just wondering, finally, kind of like considering about the concept of belonging, right? And thinking about your trajectory and Australian, Fijian, Indian, American living in the UK, right? I was just,
Mouthful. It's a
I'm
mouthful.
trying, yeah, I was trying to get the sentence right and making sure I hadn't missed anything. But in terms of them, like, I sus I'm just thinking about how you've then gained your sense of identity within your work role, but in your sense of belonging within your work role and wider. How has what you do helped to influence that? Has it in any way?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the same company, and one of the challenges I had, and then I was ready to leave, and I think, the when it comes to my identity, I really would try to say that I was one person, and I will say that when Black Lives Matter happened in the U.S. and everything political was going on, it was a big realization for me on who I was and how
Mhm,
I was approaching sort of race and all of these different subjects. And I had to really look into the mirror and say, am I uh, as fair as I expect others to be to me, and that was a nice wake up call to question that around me as well. And that was great with these corporate roles, where while I might have not been able to influence everyone around me, the people that were working close to me, it was nice to teach them concepts of bias and unconscious bias
mhm,
as I was learning them too, and really
mhm,
looking at myself of am I the person I want to be? And I think I've not to get into the details, but even still, you have thoughts in your brain, and then you say, oh, okay, well, why would I have thought that in that way? What's
mhm,
whatever different cultures you see around you. And when you ask, how do I feel my sense of belonging, I find myself now a lot happier with myself when I feel like I've shown someone else a little bit of the light. I mean, I have so much of the light to see still,
mhm,
but it's like, oh, do you realize this? So an easy example in these biases in the corporate world is you look at a resume and you see a person's name, and you very quickly make assumptions about their background and who they are because of their name,
mhm,
and that, like, reminding people over and over again of, like, okay, well, why did we decide of this person resume to either move forward or not? Making people realize that was a big part of me being a part of the leadership team, right?
mhm,
And yeah, even there, it's just quite funny because I did have like a really diverse team, whereas like sometimes when you looked around to some of the other teams, I wouldn't necessarily say so, so.
mhm, mhm,
And that just happened over time. I would just pick and like when you would go through, it's like, oh, okay, well, the better, um the more diverse the team is, that means the amount of perspectives that'll come in to make this a successful team will be more diverse and allow us to approach this in lots of different ways and possibly solve our problems a lot better.
yeah,
It's what you talk about a lot with, I mean, it's much higher levels, but there's a lot of discussions now of boardroom diversity and what that means then for the business and for the employees. But it was really nice to be able to do that,
mhm,
as like my sense of almost belonging
mhm,
in that part of my role. And now I'm with a company that is, very diverse, and that's not even something I have to even think about, which is so nice.
mhm,
So it's just now I'm so new here, but it's really elevating, different types of components now. But and actually, it when I was starting to look for a new role, it was a big part of my decision making. Is
yeah,
I want to go into a company that supports this and
yeah,
finds it in the forefront,
yeah,
um, because it does make a difference that you're not just starting all over trying to make people realize actually it's really important to have different opinions in the room.
yeah,
So
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. So you really have been on a bit of a journey, haven't you? In reality, and not just in terms of your work, it's been kind of navigating that logistical space, and understanding. It was very interesting where you spoke about potentially some of the lack of diversity and how our actions or the actions of those in the leadership perpetuate some of the barriers which face people of color or people with different names, etc., in
Yeah.
preventing inclusion. And I think that that's really fascinating. Um, but also just thinking about your whole journey in terms of how you came to terms and have thought about the different elements which have helped to make you who you are, and recognizing that you're constantly changing anyhow.
Yeah.
You know that the Sharon I'm meeting today isn't the Sharon that I met 2 years ago, and she's not the same person who came across to the UK when
Yeah.
she did. You know, there's different levels of learning. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna just kind of like close off with a couple of questions which are related to. I'm thinking about that 8-year-old who moved across to the US, right? Um, and what advice would you have given her at that stage? Think looking back now, what advice would you have given her? And the other part, what do you think she would look at you now and say, wow?
Yeah. Yeah. A simple one to the 8-year-old would be just to read more. It's it's such a like it's almost I feel like a lot of us would tell our 8-year-old
Yeah,
selves
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but who's there's but in essence, but to go into a little bit of depth on that, it wasn't until much later in my life that I realized the impacts of history to what happens today, and now, when you're seeing different components and really wondering, wow, is history about to repeat itself?
Mm,
There is a sense of, and it does repeat itself because you haven't studied it,
yeah, yeah.
um, so I would have said, to my growing, child self, I wish I had learned more about different historical things that happen in the world earlier. Because
Mhm,
when you say, how what has turned your identity into what it is today, I think it took me a lot longer in life to get to where I was, whereas I could have had the potential to do it sooner.
yeah.
But there's so many what ifs, and while I say that, the life experiences were happening, all of the immigrant stories, the et cetera, um, those life experiences did teach me a lot, even in their own right, right?
Mhm,
But I do, I'd always say read more and have learned more, or actually enjoyed learning more. It was until I was in, 19 or so that I started enjoying learning. And it's like, oh,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
still a little earlier than some people, but quite late compared to others. So,
yeah,
it's all
yeah,
relative, isn't it?
yeah.
And then the wow of that same person today, I think is honestly, even I'd say at least once a week, I'm like, man, I cannot believe I have this life. Like, I do feel really fortunate that in this moment of time, this is where I am today.
Yeah, yeah.
I would have, like I mentioned, I never even I thought I'd had, come and seen Europe, let alone live here for the last 10 years. So that is just for me, it still feels extraordinary every time. It's like, oh, I have a flat in London, like, wow, like,
Mhm,
and it's not that big of a deal, but it
mhm,
feels like it's a big deal from who I came from,
yeah, yeah.
um and yeah, and things will change, and sometimes different things happen, and maybe I'll have to end up going back because of family or whatever not, but it is that appreciation of what you have. I think that 8-year-old would be surprised at, because at that time you're 8, so you're just a kid, and you're just like, oh god, there's so many, things I don't have,
Mhm, mhm,
versus just being happy with what you do have. And
mhm,
I constantly feel like, wow, this is way more than I would have ever thought I was gonna be at.
mhm.
And it's nice that that sense of realization, I think, really helps you appreciate life and what you have with it. And that's a big part of your continued success, right?
Yeah,
Because you're not upset at your situation. So I think that reflection and appreciating the things you have in life, I do often enough, but it is when you ask that question, it's like, oh yeah, my 8-year-old self would have been like, wow. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah,
That's amazing. That really is. I do like that fact that you recognize. I think that also stems from your journey from when you went to India,
yeah,
and recognizing what poverty really is, and recognizing that, you know what, we are far away from being poor in
yeah,
what we have here compared to so many others.
yeah,
But you know, and
yeah.
it's a mindset. It's how
I'll give
we,
you a quick story on that
yeah.
because I'll just never forget. You're this like what was I 20 years old,
Mhm.
and you're like these American study abroad kids. And so I'll never forget, I'm on this, bike rickshaw that you imagine on in India.
Yeah,
And every day I'm biking past this family who's raising this child on the sidewalk. And the bike rickshaw is taking me to the bloody fancy gym, and it's like at that moment I'm like, what is happening? Like, what am I doing and what is happening in front of me? And I realized that they were raising that child there on that sidewalk because I was going so often and it was the same family. So
yeah,
it wasn't just a one off. And that moment was like, wow, how good do I have it that I'm over here going off to the gym in India, which wasn't even like that popular back then.
yeah,
Or was it? Who knows? But and I still think about that family, and yeah.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Sharon, I knew it would be. It was a brilliant conversation. All right. Um, and I know that we're going to be carrying on working on a lot of other stuff going forward. But I just want to say another really big thank you for being our special guest today. And I'm always here whenever you need me. All right. Then the two of us will just hook up. All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was awesome to be a part of. So I really appreciate the invite.
No problem. I'm going to just let people know what's happening next week. Um, so next week we're going to have, and I hope I say the name right, Alika Ashuru, who is an British